Mount Transfiguration in Mark 9 is one of the most significant moments in his gospel, and the scholarly debate about what it represents boils down to 3 points. Is it a glimpse of the future resurrection and exaltation of Jesus Christ, which seems to be the most favoured option amongst the critics? Is it a glimpse of the future parousia, or the second advent of Jesus? Or third, which is the least favoured option amongst the critics, is it a revealing of the pre-incarnate glory that Jesus Christ always had? Now in this video, I will be putting the case forward that it is a revealing of the pre-incarnate glory that Paul speaks of in Philippians 2. But before we do that, we need to address a couple things. Mark was most likely a Palestinian Jew writing in the time of Rome. A lot of this boils down to the many Latinisms that are used in his gospel. For example, in Mark 12:42, he explains the value of a Greek coin, the lepton, with a Roman one, a quadron. He also has many Aramaisms in his gospel as well. For example, in Mark 5:41, he writes, "Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise." We also have external historical evidence to a 2nd century anti-Marcionite prologue to the Gospel of Mark, which places Mark as Peter's interpreter who was writing in Italy. Mark, who was called stump-fingered because of the size of the rest of his body, he had fingers that were too short. He was Peter's interpreter. After the departure or death of Peter himself, the same man wrote his gospel in the regions of Italy. Eusebius, a 4th century Christian historian, quotes Papias, the bishop of Hierapolis in the 1st century. Mark became Peter's interpreter and wrote down accurately, but not in order, all that he remembered of the things said and done by the Lord. It's important to establish this because Mark is well versed in the Old Testament and plays a crucial role in telling his audience the gospel of Jesus Christ, as the unveiled story of Israel culminating in the prophesied kingdom of God as foretold by the prophet Daniel. And when Mark opens his gospel, he quotes 3 separate Old Testament scriptures. "Behold, I send my messenger before your face." This is a quote from Exodus 23:20. "Who will prepare your way?" This is a quote from Malachi 3:1. "The voice of the one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." This is from Isaiah 40 verse 3. This brings us to the Mount of Transfiguration, and as previously mentioned, I will be supporting the least favoured option, which is that it is a revealing of the pre-incarnate glory of Christ. And I'll be enlisting my favourite apocalyptic prophet to make my case, and that's the prophet Daniel. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up the high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. The temporal marker after 6 days is quite deliberate, and as I previously mentioned, Mark is well versed in the Old Testament, and this is a reference to Moses, where he waited 6 days before going up the mountain to meet with God. Mark posits that Jesus is the new Moses, a better mediator between man and God, as prophesied by Moses himself. But Jesus is not only the new Moses or the better one, he's actually the object of what Moses saw up the mountain, Yahweh himself. The 6 days represent the time before theophany, before the divine manifestation of God. As Moses traveled up the mountain to meet with God, so did the disciples who saw the face of God in Jesus himself. Now, this particular mountain in question, scholars have debated where this mountain actually is. However, the likely candidate is Mount Hermon. And the idea of going up the mountain to meet with God is a constant reference in the Old Testament. For instance, Exodus 3:1. Deuteronomy 5:4, and Elijah in 1 Kings 19:8. Now, keep in mind, when Jesus transfigures, Mark uses a passive Greek verb to demonstrate that he's not transfiguring himself, but revealing the pre-incarnate glory that was already there. This is not a revelation by Jesus himself, but one that the Father reveals about the Son. Jesus signifies the man going up the mountain and the God coming down the mountain. How do I back up these claims? This is when Daniel steps in. The Son of Man title used by Jesus in Mark's Gospel is quite significant because simply, Son of Man means a human being or son of Adam. God referred to Ezekiel as the Son of Man. There's nothing particularly significant about this title. However, the way Jesus uses it creates a lot of confusion amongst the readers. In Mark 2:10, "But you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Mark 2:28, "So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." As we go on, we see this Son of Man have far more significance than simply a human being, because Jesus is invoking responsibility and authority that no other human ever had before. The apex of this title is used during the trial of Jesus, when Jesus says to Caiaphas, "You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds of heaven." This is the amazing moment which culminates in the revealing of what this Son of Man title truly is, as Mark is laying somewhat of an Easter egg throughout all his gospel, is that this is the Son of Man title invoked by Daniel, specifically in Daniel 7. Now, why is that important? Because Daniel 7 was considered a Jewish forbidden scripture. I encourage everyone to look up Two Powers in Heaven by Alan Segal. Why was it considered a forbidden Jewish scripture? Well, let's delve in. Because this particular Son of Man of Daniel 7 created great confusion amongst the rabbis in Second Temple Judaism. Why? Let's have a read. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Daniel prophesied that one that looks like a human is going to be given all glory and dominion, and all nations and languages and peoples will serve and worship him. How does one reconcile that within a monotheistic religion? They simply couldn't. And we start to see that places in the Bible like Genesis 19:24 and Exodus 15:3, that there was this mysterious Yahweh figure, the visible one, which was distinct from the Yahweh figure of the heavens. And we start to see the beginning of the Trinity doctrine, of there being multiple persons but one being of God. This is the reason why Caiaphas charged Jesus with blasphemy, because he knew Jesus was invoking that Son of Man from Daniel 7. In essence, he was telling Caiaphas that he is going to worship him. He is going to be given all glory and dominion by the Father. He is the Yahweh, the visible one. Now, how does this relate to the Mount of Transfiguration? Because look how he describes Jesus and what happens to his clothes. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And this is not an accident. There's only one place in the Old Testament where God is described this way, where his clothes radiantly shine bright white. And guess where it is? It's in Daniel 7. Thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair on his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels burning fire. And please note the multiple thrones in heaven. This scripture is so significant, arguably one of the most important scriptures in the Bible, that reveals who Jesus really is. You see, the Father was unveiling the glory the Son always had, the glory that he hid, as we see in Philippians 2, that he veiled his glory even though equal with God, and took the form of a slave so that he could guide us in this world. And how do we actually properly submit to God and love God and pray to God? The Mount of Transfiguration is the revealing of the pre-incarnate glory that Jesus always had.